Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'm so pleased. I really love the city symposiums, and I think they really illuminate so many important issues for our community. So I am also going to share my screen, I hope. Whoop. Bear with me, folks. There we go, and I think that you can see me. So thank you again for inviting me. So full disclosure, I am not an artist. I'm here to represent that point of view, but I am not an artist. Although I suppose it could be said that each and every one of us are artists, each in our own way, in some unique manifestation of ourselves. But why I am here is that I am really passionately convinced and committed to the belief that the arts are a really important fundamental way that we make meaning, that we give expression, and that we make change. And I've been witness firsthand to how the arts how arts-based expression can amplify voices and can mobilize change in our community. So some of my direct experiences comes from working and being in community, having the privilege to be in communities like the Crouch Neighborhood Resource Center on Hamilton Road for many, many years. The London Coffee House, also on Hamilton Road for individuals, mostly men, who are experiencing abject poverty and homelessness. My sister's place for many, many years, some of you would know, is a day center and programs supporting women who are in poverty and homeless and experiencing other things. Also, the All Our Sisters National Forums, which were the first national forums on women and homelessness in Canada, held here in London. And then, although I'm not connected to it, I've long admired El Sistema, another local program that works with children who would not have access to arts-based programs, and a wonderful program called Belong to Song, which was a musical program for people who also don't have access to arts. So through these experiences, I have seen how art can be creative activism and how it can make an otherwise abstract experience that we other. So in other words, we see it, we may be overwhelmed by it. For example, poverty, lots of people are very concerned about it, but it happens to other people. It doesn't happen to me directly. So I'm not really sure what I can do that would make a change. But I have seen how art really can change that, because through arts-based expression, it makes experiences that others may be having, that we do not have firsthand experience of, become very real to us, become up close and personal, very visceral and local. Art can be disruptive to the dominant discourse and culture. And art can be revolutionary. This is an example that I would like to show to you, that just how art can really begin movements. So some of you may be familiar with the Red Dress Project, which was initiated by a Métis artist named Jamie Bell in 2010. To amplify and bring awareness to the issues of murdered and missing Indigenous women across Canada. It's a very effective tool that she used, which was just to put out a call for women to send in red dresses, and she used a public art installation to demonstrate that these red dresses represented numbers and numbers of missing and murdered Indigenous women across our community. And this symbol of a red dress has been used across North America. In fact, it's used as a call to action for communities, particularly on days such as Sisters in Spirit on October 4th, where we pay homage to women who are missing and murdered, and where we create awareness about this. So this is just one example of a school that is making red dress images. And actually, I have a friend who is a farm woman living in a rural community. When she became aware of this, on this day, she hangs a red dress in the tree in front of her house. And this provokes a lot of conversation amongst neighbors and passerby who want to know what this is all about. So that's an example of how we can amplify and create a sense of expression about an experience that we may not have firsthand experience of. You know, art can be revolutionary, and revolution simply means a movement or an activity that makes fundamental change in the dominant socioeconomic structure. And we really need a revolution to end poverty, folks. And art can be a powerful tool that we can bring to that movement. It's no accident that poverty disproportionately affects BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities who are so adversely affected by structural and systemic violence. And certainly that's been highlighted through these last several months through the pandemic. We've really seen how communities, BIPOC communities in particular, have been so deeply affected. And as we've had reckoning, and as we've become much more woke around issues of racism, colonization, white supremacy, and genocide, and the intersectionality of how all these things work together, we've become more heightened in our awareness of how the effects of poverty can be so deeply wounding to our entire communities. Also, poverty is very gendered, and in London, Ontario, you know, still a quarter of kids in London are living in poverty. And when we look at Indigenous communities, of whom we have a lot of representation in London, 40% of Indigenous kids are living in poverty. So this is something that we really need to be compelled by. Audre Lorde, who was a wonderful writer and civil rights activist, and a favorite of mine, she said, you know, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And as much as we do need government intervention, we also really need art as a tool, because art is not the tool of the master. Another person that I'm very fond of, Paulo Freire, who is a famous Brazilian educator and philosopher, and he wrote A Revolutionary Pedagogy for Social Justice. And he talked a lot about making beautiful trouble. It reminded me of John Lewis, the wonderful civil rights activist and United States Senator who recently died. And he talked about making good trouble. Well, Paulo Freire talked about making beautiful trouble, and he had a deep belief that people had a basic human right to art, to aesthetics, to beauty, to pleasure, to dance, and to music. And he used this frequently as platforms for people of lived experiences of various kinds of oppression to bring those experiences to bear into the dominant culture. We used these ideas actually when we formed My Sister's Place. And we also used these ideas in some of the work we did at the Crouch Neighborhood Resource Center and other locations. And we incorporated various arts-based expressions so that folks and communities could articulate themselves. That's why I was so delighted to see Amy here, because she's done such a fabulous job articulating so clearly what experiences are that many of us who are not living those experiences cannot, we cannot represent well, I don't think. And so we use these arts-based expressions so that people could relate what their experiences were, their hopes, their dreams, their desires, and their ideas for solutions for themselves as well. A popular model was theater of the oppressed. And we had the good fortune of obtaining a grant to bring someone actually who had been in Brazil to come and work with our community for several weeks. This is going back a few years. And as a result of that, we developed, the women themselves at My Sister's Place developed a theater group called the Expressions Group. And what they did in that group was that they wrote the stories of their lives, and then they performed those stories. Sometimes they would do it in two tableaus. They would perform the story of what the experience had been, for example, interacting with a housing situation, or with child welfare, or with a food bank, or what the circumstances had been that had led to them falling into poverty and homelessness. And then they would redo it and have audience members come up to determine what points of intersection might be that could change that experience. But they performed at national conferences, once at City Hall, to make a plea for funding around homelessness, to which they were successful. At one point, they performed the vagina monologues. These are just some pictures that have been in the public domain of the women performing. This was at a national conference. This was at the vagina monologues. They performed a lot at universities and educational institutions, and also, as I mentioned, at the Arts Project. Along with that, you can see how vibrant this is. There also was a drumming group that performed at various venues. There was also a photo voice, several photo voice installations. This one was called Weeping, where women took cameras onto the street, and men, and took pictures representing some of their experiences and some of their hopes and dreams. This one in particular was highlighting the issue of homelessness and how critical a key was. So art not only gives voice and expression, but it also can be ceremonial, and it can amplify joy. The mortality for women who are homeless is 8 to 10 times higher than mortality for men who are homeless. And this sometimes is thought to be because of the connections with gender-based violence, and also because homelessness is much more difficult on a woman's physiological self. So we had very high mortality at my sister's place, and because often women died and there would be no one to mourn, the women themselves came together and created a ceremony and a ritual for each woman whose life passed, using a lot of arts-based expressions to commemorate that loss. This is actually a picture of a woman who is teaching dance to her sisters from the country of her origin. And this is another picture of an art show at the Arts Project, of an art exhibition that the women did. And this is a picture of the Living on the Edge, which is a performance that they did in many venues and at a national basis as well, and for which they won an award. You know, it's very important for people, I believe, of lived experience to have access to art and art opportunities in order to amplify voices, and so that we hear much more from people who have lived experiences, but also people who work in the art field have often they're the first ones to bring our attention to issues, social issues within our communities. And I don't think it's an accident that when there is a revolution or when there is real disruption to social change, often it is the artists themselves who are identified, because they often join that. These are just some examples of artists that are bringing some illumination to particular issues, and I just thought you might find it interesting. You can see this end period poverty, which of course is something that a lot of us aren't aware of, is the incredible hardship on women who are menstruating and the lack of access to supplies. But I thought this was very clever, using, you know, pads and Tampax and Diva cups and so forth to bring that attention. And here's another example of using art to promote universal basic income and how that would revolutionize our experiences. So another world is not only possible, but she is on her way. And on a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. So it's been said that we heal through our imagination. So art is not just an important tool for activism and for change, but also for healing and for remembering who we are, for touching our very essence of ourselves. It's through our imaginations that we can transform our world, and art is a really important tool to transform our world and to end poverty. And folks, I just want to end by saying that we really need to make good and beautiful trouble where poverty is concerned.
Thank you so much, Susan. I wrote that down. That was one of my favorite lines. Making beautiful trouble. And I was going to ask you about this, but then you answered it, which was that connection in terms of what do you think it is about art in terms of embodying it? Because you started out by
Yeah.
talking about how sometimes we just actually cannot relate. You know, like we talk a lot about empathy,
Mhm.
but the fact is that sometimes we actually have not walked in someone's shoes, and so we cannot relate.
Mhm.
And so that kind of causes us to, or makes it easier for us to other people. And then, but then you
Mhm.
talk about the fact that we heal through our imagination, and we can also transform the world through our imagination. So then you answer my question at the end. So I wondered, you know, if what would your call to action be for us as we're examining this persistent, you know, problem of homelessness and poverty in our community?
Well, through the conferences of all our sisters, over and over again, we heard from women say, nothing about us without us. And I'm so pleased that Amy is here, because that's where our solutions lie. Our solutions lie in joining arms and being comrades and allies with individuals who are having experiences as a result of systemic and structural violence. We really need to disrupt our entire systems to create a sense of equity in our world. And you can see it all around us. It's here and it's now. But we need the arts to help us fuel our imagination, to form connection and to form community and to form a sense of joy. I don't know if you have ever heard of Emma Goldman, but she said, if I can't dance, I don't want to be a part of your revolution. So we need to keep dancing. We need to have beauty aesthetics, and we need to use these tools. They're the very source of our being. And so, we need all the other things, but we must have art.
Yes, because if we're going to make some beautiful trouble, we need some art. I love
That's
that.
right.
Thank you so much, Susan. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.